Okay, Professor Jim Schultz here from my Finance 512 class. As promised, based on the feedback I got from all of you guys on the midterm course evaluations, I wanted to go ahead and start doing some videos, going through some problems. To this point, it seems the videos have been extremely helpful, and so I thought, why not go ahead and try to utilize, that same medium to go through some homework problems because our time in class is definitely limited. And so I've chosen two margin problems, one of which I would label an undergraduate problem, and one of which I would label more of a graduate problem. And so I wanted to go ahead and go through each one of those. These are problems you've already done and already worked on and already have the solutions for. But these are from chapter 3, and so I think it's useful to kind of remind ourselves how this stuff works. And so the first one I want to go through is this problem right here. This first problem on the extra margin practice, and you're bullish on a stock. Current stock price is 45 a share. You have $22.50 in your stock account, so that's literally like cash that you have in your account. You're going to borrow another $1,800 from your broker, and then you're going to use all of that to go ahead and buy some stock. And so the first question is, what is the initial margin of this account? And then the second question is, if the maintenance margin is 35%, how far can this stock fall before you receive a margin call? Okay, so let's scroll down. This is the solution. I know it's really might be tough to see. It's kind of light the way that guy. I think this might be this is a scanned document, obviously, and so I think when I scanned this, it didn't come out. Sometimes it comes out better than other times. I think this time was one of the not so good times. And so, okay, so to get the initial margin, you have this equation over here. Right now, but before we get to that, it's useful to kind of note all the information that you know, right? You know you have equity of $22.50, so this is like the cash. It might even be more correct here to label that as cash. You know that you're borrowing $1,800, right? And the total is $4,050. That's 4050. This is going to be the value of the stock you're going to buy because you're using all of it to buy stock, right? And at $45 a share, you're able to buy 90 shares. Okay, so that's kind of where all this information is coming from. Then we move over here, and the key to initial margin equations are obviously very simple and should be very easy for all of you to do, right? The key is that the margin equation always follows the same basic principles. The numerator always represents the equity that you have in your account, and the denominator always represents the stock value at that point in time. So if you look more closely at the numerator, this is the equity. And if you remember, I can't really write, but if you remember from just basic accounting, you know that assets equals liability plus equity, right? But what if you were solving for equity? If you were solving for equity, it would be assets minus liabilities. And that's exactly what you see here, right? This $4,050, this is all cash that you have in your account because that was your cash to begin with, and then you borrowed that cash. So that's total cash. So cash, which is an asset, minus the $1,800, which is the loan value, that's what you borrowed, right? So you take the assets minus the liabilities, and then you simply divide by the total stock value, which again is $4,050. And that brings you to 55.56%. And so that's going to be your initial margin on this account. Now, the second question, how far can this stock fall before you get a margin call? That's when you're going to set the margin equation up. On the left-hand side, you're going to insert whatever the maintenance margin is. So here it's 35%, so that's 0.35, right? And then on the right-hand side, now this may look a little different, but it's actually this equation just broken down a little differently, right? So the numerator is still assets minus liabilities. But here you're solving for the stock price that's going to get you to this margin level. And so you can't represent this as 4,050 anymore, which was this number. You have to represent it as the number of shares you have, which is 90, times whatever the stock price is that's going to lead to a margin of 35%. And so that's why that is 90p. So you have 90p minus 1,800 divided by that same 90p because this is the stock value, and that gets you to this equation. If you multiply both sides by 90p, you get 31.5p equals 90p minus 1,800. And then to get 3077, I simply subtracted 90p from both sides, and let me double check. I got my calculator here. Let me make sure. So 31.5 minus 90 is, on the left hand side here, you would have been left with negative 58.5p is equal to negative 1800. And don't let the negatives confuse you, because remember, when you divide by a negative, the negatives drop off, and so then you're left with a positive 30.77. So that is how you would solve this problem. So now moving into the next problem I want to do, which I would label this more of a graduate level problem, would be Chapter 3, Number 10. Now, without reading the exact question to you, here's the key information you know. You buy 300 shares of a company named Internet Dreams at $40 a share. You borrow $4,000 from your broker to complete the purchase, and the interest rate on your loan is 8%. Now, this is a new piece of information that you've already obviously been working on in your homework, but that we haven't talked about in class. Most of the time, when you borrow money from your broker, he's going to charge you an interest rate on that loan. And so in this situation, you have an interest rate of 8%. And so this problem asks you a few different things. What is the initial margin? If the price falls to $30, then how much margin is left? And will you get a margin call? And then what is the rate of return on the investment? So let's click open the solution here. So this is the solution. Here's all the information that we know, right? This top information is what I just kind of went over in the question stem. And so you're going to buy 300 shares at 40 a share. So it's going to cost you a total of 12 grand, right? Now, of that 12,000, you borrowed 4,000, right? So you might be able to deduce from that okay, then 8,000 of that must have been your own money, right? Whether it be cash, UST bills, or whatever, 8,000 of that was your money. So your initial margin, again, assets minus liabilities divided by stock purchase, or stock value, or stock purchase, I guess, but stock value is more correct. So your assets are going to be the 8,000 you have in equity that we can deduce from these two numbers, plus the $4,000 in cash that you borrow, minus your liabilities, the $4,000 in cash that you borrow, right? So that's how you get the numerator, and then the denominator is simply the initial stock value, so it's going to be 12 grand, so it gives you an initial margin of 66.67%. Okay? Now, moving down to part B, what if the price falls to $30 in 1 year? Will you get a margin call? All right, now there's a few extra components to this one, all right? The first thing you have to understand is all right, I've borrowed this $4,000 for a year. I've got to pay that 8% interest expense, right? And of course, remember that these interest rates are always quoted annually, so that's an 8% annual rate. So what is 8% of $4,000? Well, if you work it out, it comes out to $320. So you have an interest expense on your hands now of $320. So that has to be factored in to your margin equation, because it's literally cash coming out of your pocket, okay? Now, how much is the stock actually worth to you? So, you own this stock now, right? So it is an asset to you. So how much is it worth to you? Well, it is, you purchased $300. It's worth $30 a share. So your total stock value, right? This is an asset to you, is going to be $9,000. So the $9,000, up here we called it cash, and this was all cash. But that's because we hadn't really purchased the stock yet. Now that we've purchased the stock, we've turned that cash into an asset, the stock that we own. So the stock that you own is only worth $9,000. So that's your only asset. Minus your liabilities here are essentially going to be, this is not technically a liability, it's more of an expense, but it needs to be grouped in with the liability that you have to determine your new margin. So you borrowed the $4,000 that you have to pay back, plus you have an interest expense of $320, so you have to take $9,000 minus this sum divided by the current stock value, which is $9,000, and that gives you 52%. The maintenance margin was 30%, so since it did not fall to 30%, you will not receive a margin call, right? And, I could have easily asked you in this problem, well, how far can the stock fall to get that would lead to a margin call? And that's when you would follow the same setup that we saw in the first problem I did tonight, where this would not be 9,000, it would be 300p minus this sum divided by 300p is equal to 30%. And then moving on to the final part. The final part's pretty easy. Whenever you need to find your return on an investment, If you've had me before, you might remember this this catchy jingle that I taught you guys. It's simply new minus old divided by old. So it's the new price of whatever you have minus the old price of whatever you have divided by the old price of whatever you have. Now, the whatever you have here is the equity in your account. So it's essentially what is the new value of your equity minus what was your equity when you began, or the old value of the equity in the problem, divided by the old equity. So in this problem, the 4680, this is just this difference. 9,000 minus 4320 is 4680. So that is the new value of your equity. Your old equity, as we saw at the beginning of the problem, is 8,000. So 4680 minus 8,000 divided by 8,000 is you have a return of minus 41.5%. So that is how you would solve number 13 for chapter 3.